Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today at this briefing on an important judgment the Validity Foundation has just achieved, and that was released by the European Court of Human Rights yesterday in Strasbourg. My name is Stephen Allen, and I'm the Executive Director of the Validity Foundation. Validity is a specialized international non-governmental organization that exists to defend the human rights of people with disabilities, in particular through taking legal action to promote and protect their human rights. Today, I'm joined by two of my colleagues from here in Validity, Sharka Dushkova and Shandor Gurbay, both of whom have worked alongside me and the team at Validity over the last years since 2017 to shine a light on the horrific situation faced by the adults and children of the Topház institution just outside of the capital here in Budapest. We will also, I hope, have some remarks today from some of our partners from across Europe, including from our colleagues at the European Network on Independent Living and from the Centre for Legal Resources in Bucharest. Before I go into some of the detail, I should mention that this webinar will be recorded and shortly after will be uploaded to Validity's website and social media channels. Automated captioning is also available if you click on the CC button. Our full statement concerning the case, which is known as the Validity Foundation on behalf of TJ versus Hungary, is available on our website, and there are links in the chat box to Validity's statement, the judgment of the European Court, and the original report exposing the situation in Topház. After these opening remarks, I'll give the floor to my colleagues for a few minutes, and then we will open for questions from the floor. To raise a question, please raise your hand and you'll be asked to unmute, and then you can state your affiliation and your question for us. So before I hand over, I want to say that in 2017, Validity uncovered the appalling neglect and abuse faced by the 220 adults and children with disabilities who were detained at the Topház institution. This was a state-maintained, locked facility in which 220 people who were detained there were subjected to some of the most unspeakable cruelties that I have certainly ever seen, and that many of my colleagues also have too. This included acts that amounted to torture, violence, severe neglect, malnutrition, physical and chemical restraint. The majority of the people in Topház were and still are under state guardianship. They are under the complete control of the Hungarian authorities. They are locked away from society, and they have had no access to the outside world and no access to the justice for the harms they have faced. When we originally came across TJ and the other residents of the Topház institution, we knew that this was an extremely serious situation. We took every step to notify the public authorities here in Hungary and demand urgent and immediate actions. We informed the police. We informed the maintaining authorities. We informed the central government ministries, and we informed the international community. But at every stage, the barriers went up. Hungary refused to grant Validity any further access to the victims, and indeed simply took the step of firing the director, but closed the doors to prevent any further actions on behalf of the victims. Soon after we met TJ, her health continued to decline, and within the following months, she died. According to the authorities, she simply died because she had contracted pneumonia. They didn't take into account the abuse and ill treatment she had faced in this institution. They even threatened Validity with criminal investigations for daring to take action on her behalf. because according to them, it was the guardians who should have acted. And in fact, the guardians never did act. The state-appointed guardian, we believe, may not even have met TJ in the months and years in the run-up to her death. Yesterday, the European Court of Human Rights rejected the submissions of the Hungarian government. They found Hungary responsible for both substantive and procedural violations of TJ's right to life. They rejected Hungary's objections to validity representing TJ, who had, in reality, been condemned to the complete control of the state. Unless validity had acted, her story would never be known. And we sadly know that at least 10 other victims of the institution have also subsequently died. Before I hand over the floor, I want to make a couple of other important messages following the coverage that we have seen here in Hungary following the judgment. The first is that this case is crucially important as validity was granted standing by the European Court of Human Rights to pursue this case. It is essential that independent civil society can enter such institutions and also take action when the authorities refuse to do so. My colleague Sharka will speak further about this point. Secondly, yesterday, the court awarded validity €10,000 in costs for taking this case. This is no win for us, but this money will immediately go back into us being able to represent further victims of Topház. Today, we are calling on other individuals and family members to come forward if you would like to pursue justice for the people of Topház. We are ready to take your cases. And thirdly, recently, I think in the last week, the new maintainers of the Topház institution, which is now called the House of Providence, this is now run by the charitable service of the Hungarian Maltese Order. They proudly displayed some new group homes that they had constructed and moved people to from Topház. This is no solution. A golden cage will remain a cage until the victims of Topház have their legal capacity restored, can access justice directly, and can be restored to their rightful place in the community. With those opening remarks, I now would like to give the floor to my distinguished colleague, Sharka Dushkova. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you for the overview of the judgment. I'm going to speak a little bit more in detail about three crucial aspects of the judgment. I want to say once again that this judgment is groundbreaking for several reasons. The first one is that Stephen already mentioned the fact that validity was even granted standing to represent the victim. To specify here, we didn't have any formal power of representation on behalf of the victim. There was simply no way we could have obtained it because the victim was under legal guardianship. She was effectively prevented to give us a power of representation. We were also denied access to her, even though we requested it several times. It's so crucial that the court recognized this barrier and understood this context and ensured that the guardianship and the close nature of the institution, in fact, is not a barrier for a victim in accessing justice. I cannot stress out how many times at Validity we encounter similar situations and similar barriers in Hungary, in Czechia, in Slovenia, in Bulgaria, in Moldova, in many other countries. This recognition of Validity's role in bringing cases before the European Court of Human Rights as the so-called de facto representative is really crucial for this case, is really crucial for many other cases to come in the future. The second reason the judgment is groundbreaking, and that is really the core of the case, is that the court made a clear connection here between the victim's death and the decades of neglect and mistreatment that she experienced in the institution in Topház. In this part, I have to say that the judgment really well describes the effects of long-term institutionalization And in any case, the victim's decline was very well captured by the medical records and witness testimonies. We can see that from a person who was walking independently, moving around freely in the institution, speaking to others, interacting. In the course of several years, she went to a person who was lying in her bed, tied to the radiator next to her bed at night and day at the time, who was severely malnourished and only fed by baby formula at the age of 45. The photos that demonstrate this are really shocking, and I believe this must have had an impact on the court and on the judges, because the decline was really, it was incredibly sad to see. The state authorities themselves, even the Budapest City Court, actually recognized that Topház could not meet the needs or uphold the dignity of the residents. And the court noted, and this is very well put, I would say, that the victims lived in neglect and abandonment. And still the Hungarian authorities did nothing about it, pretending as if nobody was responsible for that. And this is what the court very clearly countered and very clearly disagreed with. I quote the court here. The court said, "The victim was fully dependent on the institution for her most basic needs: her place of residence, her medical care, daily activities, interaction with the outside world. Her long-term institutionalization and loss of contact with the outside world increased her dependence. She couldn't leave, and the state's failure to provide care for her thus became a matter of life and death for her. And this is why the state must be held responsible for her situation," the court said. So the court ruled that the inaction of the Hungarian authorities violated their positive obligations under the right to life as guaranteed under the convention. And as I said, this is very significant because it links long-term institutionalization with premature deaths. And it forces Hungary and really many other countries in Europe to reconsider how they treat their most vulnerable ones in their social care systems. From our experience, the situation in social care situations in other European countries may well raise similar issues under the convention. So this is very important. And a third critical aspect of the judgment that is very closely linked to this one is the court found a violation of the state's duty to effectively investigate deaths in institutions. The Hungarian authorities here investigated somehow after multiple complaints from Validity, but their conclusion was very limited. They essentially only concluded that the victim's death was a natural consequence of her disability and pneumonia at the age of 45. The court found this insufficient and inadequate because it completely failed to consider the role that the conditions, the mistreatment and the neglect in Topház played in her premature death. I refer back here to what I mentioned before, the steady decline of the health of the victim that's very well captured by the medical records. That clearly had to have impact on her dying. And so it seems that the court recognized a pattern here. People in these institutions die young, and this must not be left unnoticed. It must be investigated. We must understand why it happens. And this ruling in this case sets a very important precedent because it says that states are now required not only to explain the immediate cause of death of victims in institutions, they are required to investigate the conditions that may have contributed to it. This is so key for so many other victims in Europe who live in large-scale institutions, who've died in these large-scale institutions, and, you know, who may disappear without proper explanation as it happens. And so I can assure you that Validity will be relying on this precedent a lot in our future work. In conclusion, this judgment brings a great satisfaction, but it would not be a full story if I didn't mention what Stephen opened with, that it comes after a very long struggle for justice. It was years and years of domestic litigation that really seemed hopeless at times. The Hungarian authorities consistently dismissed Validity's efforts to access the victims, to identify their guardians, to be able to, you know, make them ensure safety of the victims or bring legal actions on their behalf. Validity was even targeted for publishing a report that showed conditions where the victims lived. This must change, really. It should not be so difficult for victims of such severe human rights violations to have their cases heard. And so I want to close with a call on those of you who know anybody who resided at Topház or who may still reside at Topház. We are still pursuing justice on behalf of those who were mistreated or neglected there through an Actio Popularis case. If you want your close one to be included in this case, now is the time to join us. I really believe that after this judgment from the European Court of Human Rights, we have a stronger chance than ever. Thank you. And now I'd like to pass word to my colleague, Sándor Gurbáy, who will speak a little bit more about the context in which these violations occurred and what is Hungary expected to do right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sharka, and thank you, Stephen. So what I would like to speak about is, I mean, Sharka, you talked about the case. Stephen talked about the current situation now in Hungary, what is happening concerning the judgment of the European Court of Human Rights. I mean, the next question which comes into our mind is that what has been happening after the death of TJ, which happened in 2018? Are there any changes in the legislation or the implementation of the legislation? So I would like to talk about this, and especially about two specific issues which you have already mentioned in this press release. The first one is the guardianship system, and the second is institutionalization. So for that, I would like to share my screen. Oops. Just a second, because I cannot really see anything here. Yep. So now you can see my screen, and this slide is about the number of people placed under guardianship in Hungary. This is an automated translation of the Hungarian website of the Central Statistical Office. And according to this, you can see in the second column the number of people under guardianship. And we can see that there is a kind of stagnation from even from 2025 until the end of last year. It is the number stagnates around like 27,000 people. And what we can see from this slide again that it tells us the number of people under guardianship who have certain disabilities, and it says psychiatric illness as well for certain people. But we know that psychiatric illness is a psychosocial disability. So these people are all, I mean, all of those who are placed under guardianship, or at least almost all of them, are persons with disabilities, and the majority of these people who are placed under guardianship are under plenary guardianship, which means that they cannot decide at all on several aspects of their, or all aspects of their lives. And there is a column here about the number of people placed in residential institutions, and this number shows that at the end of last year there were 27,576 people placed under guardianship who placed in institutions who were under guardianship. So this is very telling. The next slide briefly is this is the number of residents who were placed in social care institutions, different types. And what is important for us, I don't want to go into details, but by the end of last year, there were 76,000, more than 76,000 people under long-term residential care in Hungary. It includes, of course, older people, persons with disabilities, homeless people. But what we can say is the number of people with disabilities who were in long-term care, as we saw that in the previous slide, those are more than 27,000 people. And this slide is about the, again, the number of people under social care, but it is divided by no, this is the service providers. I mean, what sort of service providers are providing long-term care or like for persons with disabilities, which means that that these persons with disabilities like TJ, who were placed in big institutions. So this slide shows the maintainer of these institutions, and what we can see here is in the row which indicates the maintainer of churches or faith-based organizations, there is a increase in those institutions who are maintained by churches. And that was the case with Topház institution, because in 2018, the Topház was handed over to the charitable service of the Order of Malta. And this is somehow what is happening now here in Hungary, that the state gives these institutions to churches and faith-based organizations. And this slide shows the new structure of care, which was presented in the so-called deinstitutionalization plan of Topház. So this is how Topház imagined the institutionalization. And as far as we know, this is the reality now, how the big institution was transformed into mini institutions. You can see here the locations. I mean, the Topház was located in Göd, not so far from Budapest, and you can see that the two care homes were created for 48 people who are considered the most disabled in Topház. They will stay on the grounds of the big institution in Göd, but placed in two mini institutions, to like supported housing type of housing. A group home has been existing in Göd for ages on the territory of the big institution with 10 people. 24 places were created for so-called supported housing, which are group homes, which we know that those are not in line with the requirements of the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, and those are again on the grounds of the big institution in Göd. Supported housing were created around Göd, in the vicinity of Göd, for 138 people, and support services are created for 100 people around the big institution in the surroundings. Daycare services are also present for 100 people, which means that these are segregated services for only persons with disabilities, and persons with disabilities are going back, even if they are living around Göd, they go back to the place where the big institution can be found. Supported employment is also provided for 31 people, again, on the grounds of the big institution in Göd. And crisis care service is created for 6 people, again, on the grounds of the big institution. And catering service is provided for all of the residents of the big Topház institution, now the House of Providence, and for those people who are living in small group homes in Göd and around Göd. And finally, my last slide is about the money spent on the modernization of the old Topház institution and for the DI process, the so-called deinstitutionalization process in Göd. So in 2015, European Union money was invested in the old Topház institution, which is now not in use. And for the deinstitutionalization process, I mean, like creating group homes, the Hungarian state spent 5.8 billion Hungarian forint, which is more than 15 million euro. So this is what happened in Hungary, and here I would like to stop and give the floor back to Stephen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shani. I think Validity, as you know, advocates for compliance with international human rights law, and I think it is deeply troubling to us, even more than 7 years since we uncovered the situation at Topház, that there has been so little change. One of the questions we frequently receive, including from national and international media, is, has the situation in Topház really changed? What I have to tell you is that even though the maintenance was handed over to a now charitable service, the Hungarian charitable service of the Order of Malta, I'm afraid that authority continues to refuse to allow Validity monitors access to the institutions, despite our repeated requests, and despite the fact that we do even have authorization to provide legal representation to a client therein. So today we again call on the Maltese charitable order to provide access. It's not sufficient simply to be holding press conferences with these freshly built services and not allowing independent monitors to access the real situation inside that institution. Before we open for questions, I'm delighted to announce that we also have an important partner of Validity's present. This is Ines Bulic-Kojakaru. Ines, there you are. You pop up on my screen on time. Wonderful. Who is the director of the European Network on Independent Living. Ines, may I give you the floor for some remarks?
Yes, thank you, Stephen, and thank you for allowing me to say a couple of words on behalf of the European Network on Independent Living. Well, first of all, I would like to congratulate colleagues at Validity for this case, for taking this case, which has taken many years, and we know a lot of work to get to this important judgment. I would just like to say a couple of words about what this case means for us at ENIL. So of course, it's interesting to know and to remind ourselves that Hungary was among the first countries in the world, in fact, to ratify the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities in 2007, which is now 17 years ago. And since then, and since before that as well, Hungary has had an obligation to ensure that all persons with disabilities in Hungary, regardless of their support needs, are provided with the support services, with the assistive technology, with housing, with everything they need to enable them to live independently in the community. Yet we still have so many people like TJ living and dying in institutions like Topház and in group homes that Sándor mentioned. And I found it really cynical to read this particular statement in the judgment in paragraph 111, where it says, in their view, in the government's view, Ms. TJ's placement in the social care institution had not been a restriction of her liberty, but had offered her a chance of survival, providing her with assistance and care without which she could not have lived as long as she had. She had been a beneficiary of supportive social services, which could not be construed as discrimination. So this shows a complete lack of understanding on the Hungarian government's part of what it is to live in the community, what it is to live. And it shows a complete disregard for the value of disabled people's lives. And that is also interesting because these days, I believe this week, Hungary, which now holds the EU presidency, organized a big conference on the rights of persons with disabilities called You Are Value. But, you know, what kind of value? I mean, this is really, really cynical. The judgment like this is really important to show the harms of it, the harms of institutionalization, and really to show the lack of understanding by the authority what institutionalization means, what it does to people, and what is the alternative to institutionalization. So we will certainly use it also, not just towards the Hungarian authorities, but towards the European Union, which, as Sándor said, has funded Topház, but continues to fund both large institutions like this and also group homes that were mentioned. So thank you, colleagues, for all the work. And we do hope that that this will have some impact, and not importantly, it will not lead to improving the conditions in institutions in the sense of physical conditions. You know, it will not lead to renovation, to increasing the number of staff, but it will spark another debate, discussion around what are the real alternatives to institutions. How can we ensure that people with disabilities like TJ can have a good life, a regular life like everybody else in the community? Because if she had had that opportunity, for sure she would not have ended like this. And in other countries, she might have, you know, had a job, a family. She might have had a completely regular, of course, much better life. So thank you, and we shall certainly use this judgment in our advocacy for deinstitutionalization and for the right to independent living for all people with disabilities in Europe and wider. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ines. And if you'll stay with us, we're going to open for some questions just in a moment. Of course, Ines here has pointed out that simply improving the conditions in Topház and in any other institution will not take us further here. And so we want this to be a very, very important message. We know that there is a strong campaign to promote the new group home model, both in Topház, but also more widely. And one of the most significant problems we see is that this is receiving extensive budgetary support, both from national governments' budgets, as well as from the EU, the European Union budget. There was, of course, evidence of EU funding in the Topház institution when we entered it in 2017. So now I would invite anyone who would like to come in to raise your hand. We'll unmute you. I see that we have a first person already, who is Kester Eddy. So we will unmute you. Please state your name and your affiliation when you come in, and let us know who you're directing the question to. Thank you. I think you can unmute now. Could you unmute? Seems that we have some. Kester, can you unmute? Okay, I don't think this is working. If I may, and I'll go back for one moment as well to my colleague Sándor. Sándor, this issue of the lack of progress on both deinstitutionalization and guardianship has also come under the investigation of the United Nations. Would you say a couple of words about that? And we will also try and bring in Kester when he's ready. Thank you.
Yeah, sure, Stephen. So again, Validity Foundation, together with other NGOs here from Hungary, we initiated a so-called inquiry process before the UN Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. This is the committee which is responsible for the for the implementation of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And as Ines mentioned before, Hungary was the second to ratify the convention and was the first to ratify the convention and the optional protocol to the convention. So we initiated that procedure because Hungary was really not respecting and violating the rights of persons with disabilities, especially by placing them under guardianship, by institutionalizing them, and violating their right to freedom from non-discrimination. Also, we touched upon the lack of inclusive education system in the country, and the CRPD committee even came to Hungary, visited institutions, had meetings with government people, with civil society, and finally published their report in which found Hungary responsible for grave and systematic violations of several human rights of persons with disabilities, including their right to like equality before the law, which is the right to decide, not to place them under guardianship, the right to live in the community, like not to place them in institutions, and also their right to freedom from non-discrimination. Last year, the Hungarian government had to reply to the findings of the CRPD committee, and they did not acknowledge these findings. Last year, the CRPD committee reviewed the Hungarian government's actions after the inquiry report, and they found that nothing happened in Hungary since the inquiry report was published. So Hungary is not really, the Hungarian government is not taking into consideration the call of the CRPD committee on the government to act according to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities.
Thank you very much, Sándor. Let's see if we can bring in Kester again. Kester, are you with us?
Hi, can you get, oh yes, great. Sorry
Yes.
about that last impasse, my computer thing. Anyway, good morning. Stephen, the descriptions you give are something like out of Alexander Solzhenitsyn's book, of a prison camp in Siberia rather than a social home in an EU country. It really is quite shocking. I've got a bunch of questions, but perhaps I'll just keep it to two so that others have a chance. These new system of homes, I can't, group homes, I think you called them. Could you kind of clarify a little bit? Because what it seems to me you're saying is that these group homes are just like, although they look good from the outside, perhaps with a smaller group of people, so you could imagine they're more intimate and more friendly, but actually they're just mini tophazes, that the real conditions aren't changing. If I've got that wrong, please correct me. And then I'd like to bring up one point, just sort of thinking of the future. Many of the NGOs, or those NGOs in Hungary which are fighting for the rights of asylum seekers, have been accused in the past of being, I can't remember what it, business NGOs, or it's a business for them because they're appealing in Brussels and then getting support from Brussels, EU money for their efforts. You have been awarded 10,000 euros for this. Considering you've been fighting for this for 7 years, I can hardly feel that even covers your costs. Perhaps, could you answer that question? Does it even cover your costs for these fights? Just for, I can imagine a future accusation coming up that you are a business NGO. Okay, I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kester. I saw my colleague Sharka shaking her head. Do you want to just come straight in, Sharka, on that point?
Absolutely, because yes, I assume that question could come, but we actually, you can see it from the judgment as well. We calculated our costs very precisely, and we were very careful to include only the costs that really, strictly speaking, related to these proceedings before the court and immediately preceding it. So not even the whole Topház litigation that lasted so many years. Those costs ran over 18,000 euro. So as you say, the 10,000 euro we were awarded does cover part of our costs. And it's incredibly important, and it's very good for us because it will allow us to continue representing the victims of Topház. As I mentioned, the Actio Popularis case is ongoing, so we continue having costs in representation of these victims, and this will help us to do so. But it certainly doesn't even cover the costs that we already incurred. I would say it covers less than half of it. So that is the nature of the business that we're in. It's not really a business, as you say.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sharka. Kester, to your first question, the new system of group homes, what's our problem with them? Well, one of the issues for Validity and our partners here today is that we increasingly see governments turn to what they call a way to achieve deinstitutionalization. Deinstitutionalization isn't just a nice or very long word. It's actually an obligation under international human rights law to ensure that people with disabilities can live in the community. The problem with the small group home model is that it doesn't solve the key issues that people in such places face. People with disabilities still in these places have no right to choose where they live, with whom they live. These institutions often continue to be closed settings where people are not able to come and go as they wish. And indeed, they continue to infringe on a number of other rights, including the right, for example, to access the open labour market, to access education, and to have a life that is fully included in the community. So small group homes are a model which simply provide forms of shelter and care for people with disabilities, but do little, for example, to enable them to exercise their full range of rights. The other issue, of course, with people placed in these settings is that they often continue to have no other real or effective choice. So this is the only choice they're given. And secondly, that people continue often to remain under guardianship, meaning even if they chose to leave, they wouldn't necessarily be able to do so if their guardians refuse that to them. So as a famous judge from the British Supreme Court once said, a golden cage is still a cage. Historically, these group homes were set up and said to be a transitionary stage for persons with disabilities to move from these old abusive regimes of the type that you described, Kester, in terms of moving them along the way so that they could then become more independent and eventually leave such places. The evidence now, unfortunately, with over 15 years of experience of seeing these places come up in many places around Europe, is that people don't actually ever leave. And indeed, one of the other issues is that because there are so many of them in comparison to the big institutions, it's almost impossible for any independent monitoring to occur. And so the abuses that happen inside these places really are even more hidden in some ways than in the big old institutions. I hope that gives some explanation, Kester. I should also say that whilst the Topház institution and the images, of course, are quite graphic, and you mentioned the gulags of Siberia, these are not unique. We do know that tens of thousands of persons with disabilities remain detained here in Hungary in institutions of similar scales and sizes across the country. And actually, this is a phenomenon much more widely in Europe. It's not an excuse, or there is no excuse that there is a lack of funding here, because in fact, state budgets and the European budget are pumping in tens, hundreds of millions of euros, as you have seen. And that should really be, in our view, under the control of people with disabilities themselves to live a dignified life in the community. I'd like to bring in next, I see that we have Dragana Cilic-Milovanovic, who is an important partner for us with the Disability Rights International. Dragana, could I invite you to come in? Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you for inviting me to be here today, and huge congratulations on this ruling. I can't emphasize enough how important it is for all of us using international law to shed a light on abuses going on in institutions around the world. As you know, Disability Rights International is a sister organization, as we like to call it, to Validity Foundation, as we also use litigation in the inter-American system and globally to shed a light on abuses, torture, ill treatment, trafficking, and all the other human rights abuses that are happening when people are locked and forgotten in these institutions. I can't tell you how important it is that the NGO is granted standing in this case, that Validity was granted standing. I've been in the situation so many times while I was investigating institutions in Serbia, where we really felt completely unable to challenge the abuses that were happening, because there was no way for us to be granted a standing and highlight the abuses we were seeing. So this is not really a case only important for Hungary, it's important for countries in the region. It's important for countries globally where our organizations like Validity and DRI are bringing cases to showcase the abuses and get reparations for victims. It's really fantastic that this ruling just came at this time, at the same time when DRI achieved a huge victory in the inter-American system, and I hope to be able to share more details soon, because they're all building, I believe, a very good case to start deinstitutionalization as a whole process, not simply related to individual victims, while we definitely need to shed light on these lives that were affected and many of them lost in this struggle. But also we need to think about future, about children who are coming into institutions, that we need to change the entire system to stop new placements and thus prevent further abuses. So huge congrats and thank you for inviting me to speak.
Thank you so much, Dragana, and it's an honor to work with you at Disability Rights International in this area. We hope that these decisions can give some hope, in fact, to other organizations of persons with disabilities and civil society organizations who are really demanding for some access to justice in this case. I know that my colleague Shandor wants to come in briefly in relation to Kester's question. Before he does so, if I may, Shandor, we have a hand up from Cristina Paderi. So Cristina Paderi, would you like to come in?
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm from Italy. My name is Cristina Paderi. I'm secretary of a national Italian organization. It's called Diritti alla Follia. In Italy, there are thousands of people under supportive administration, which is in many cases is a disguised guardianship. We are about to send an individual communication to the CRPD committee regarding a girl hospitalized against her will for 11 years in a group home here in Italy. She was under supportive administration. The victim passed away in 2018, 2022, we would still like to submit the case to the committee. Do you think it should be still reported? Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. I think we missed the last sentence, perhaps, of what you said.
Okay. The victim has passed away in 2022. We would still like to submit the case to the committee. Do you think it should still be reported?
Thank you very much, Christina. I'm going to ask my colleague Sharka perhaps to come in on this with any thoughts. But before I do so, Sharka, if you don't mind. Oh, go ahead.
Absolutely. So I
Right.
think it would be important to see the case in more details, but as a general rule, I absolutely think it should be reported. As a general rule, though, if you want to submit an individual communication, even to the UNCRPD committee, you're required to exhaust domestic remedies. So that means that firstly, you need to report that case to the domestic authorities and give them the chance to investigate on their own. Of course, we know that very often this doesn't happen very effectively, but even in the case of Topház, we really had to go through all the years of litigation domestically to prove to the international bodies that the state did have a chance to do something about it. So my first question would be, did you try to report it domestically? And if so, what happens there? You know, then after you've gone through the investigation domestically, you've exhausted the domestic remedies to the last point, then a communication to the UNCRPD committee can be submitted. Generally speaking, though, if the death occurred in 2022, there should still be time to submit such domestic complaint, criminal complaint, I assume that would be.
Okay.
Very
Thank you
quickly.
very much.
But
Thank
I
you
welcome
very
you,
much.
if you want to discuss that, feel free to write us to our email, legal@validity.ngo. And we can discuss that together.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much. On that note, I would want to highlight that Validity is a specialized legal advocacy organization, and it's not uncommon for us, of course, to provide support, advice, and expertise both in Europe and far beyond. Unfortunately, I would also say, back to a previous point that was mentioned, is that the resourcing available to conduct legal advocacy on the rights of persons with disabilities is decreasing all the time. Validity has received both private finance and EU funding, but this is decreasing all the time. And so this is a real challenge for us all, because actually there are very few lawyers willing to take these sorts of cases, as you will very well know, in many of our countries. Shandor, could I bring you in and just also invite any final participants who want to raise a question? Please raise your hand if you'd like to. We have a couple more minutes. But Shandor, over to you, please.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. And just coming back to Castor's question, how you started your intervention, you mentioned that these institutions are like prisons. And I would like to react to that. I mean, indeed, these are prison-like settings or facilities. And this is why exactly these are considered places of detention. The big institutions and small institutions, group homes as well. And why it is important. The CRPD committee, the Committee on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, 2 years before, in 2022, adopted the guidelines on the institutionalization, including in emergencies. And this document says that institutionalization constitutes a deprivation of liberty and detention on the basis of impairment. And based on that, this year, another UN body, the Subcommittee for the Prevention of Torture, they adopted their first general comment in which they are giving a clarification on places of detention, and they are exactly quoting these UN guidelines of the CRPD committee, reinforcing that group homes and other types of institutions, they are places of detention. So this is why they not only seem like prisons, but they are places of detention. Yeah, this is what I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kester, I see that you'd like to come in again, so please do.
Yes, I didn't really want to take anyone else's place, so I tried to leave it a chance for a question. I tried to wait to the end here. Sorry, I should have introduced myself. I'm a freelance journalist here in Budapest. Just a very short question here, Stephen, really basically. Who owns these institutions in Hungary? So who should we go to as journalists if we want to get their point of view, please?
Superb. Thank you very much. The very specific answer to the question of Topház is now it's under the control and the authority of the Charitable Order of Malta, so the Charitable Service of the Order of Malta. We would ask you to go to them. Of course, institutions for persons with disabilities in the country may be under the authority of different authorities. Some of those are state authorities, and there we would invite you to approach the Child Protection and Social Care Directorate under what used to be, I mean, Sándor, you can help me here. It used to be the Ministry of Human Capacities, but I think it's changed name now. Do you want to confirm that, Sándor?
Yes, it's the Ministry of Interior now.
The Ministry of the Interior at this point, because we don't have a specialized ministry anymore. And of course, many other of the institutional forms, as Sándor pointed out, are maintained by a number of different organizations, increasingly by church maintained charitable organizations. So we can share some contacts with you on that. I hope that answers the question. Thank you. I don't think we have any other hands at this point, and so we are coming up to the 1 hour mark. Oh, sorry, we do have one more hand. I see Richa Sharma, also another very important partner of Validity. Richa, could I invite you? Please, go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Stephen. I would really like to congratulate a Validity Foundation on behalf of TCI Global for this important and crucial achievement. And also just want to highlight that this serves as an example that state parties must recognize the gross human rights violations that happen in institutions across the world. So it's not just one country, it's not just one region, but and I speak this as we are a global organization of persons with psychosocial disabilities. So yeah, just want to thank you for the work that you've been doing in this direction. And also this emphasizes again that the UN guidelines on deinstitutionalization serves as the reference point for the complete and full implementation of the CRPD. So thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Richa. Thank you very much also to my colleagues here, Sharka, Sándor, also Ines from the European Network on Independent Living, Dragana from Disability Rights International, and of course, you, Richa, and all of the team at Transforming Communities for Inclusion for joining us here today. Validity currently has a docket of cases in Europe and Africa exceeding approximately 50 cases, which are being litigated at national, regional, and international courts and tribunals, from local domestic courts right through to United Nations treaty bodies and the European Court of Human Rights. And will continue as far as we can to provide our support to organizations of persons with disabilities to take these sorts of cases. We don't provide legal aid, and every case we take, we never ask for any costs from any of the clients. We take the cases to promote systematic change and improvement in the human rights of persons with disabilities. So with those remarks, I want to thank all of you for joining us today. Please feel free to reach out to us. You can contact us after this via validity@validity.ngo. One of my colleagues will put that in the chat box. Thank you very much again to everyone who has been involved both in monitoring this case and litigating it for these many, many years. I know that our actions are not yet over, so thank you very much.